Hey, welcome to the Relentless Positivity Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Martin, and we got an exciting one today because we are two birds from one feather, something like that. We don't know how that goes. So my guest today is Ed Doherty. He's an accomplished leadership expert. He's an author. He's an executive with over 40 years of experience in various high-level roles. And he's got a new memoir out. It's Observations at the Speed of Life, and it's just stories from his life, talking about the importance of persistence and self-improvement, things that we were talking about before we started recording that a lot of kids need to hear about these things right here. So Ed, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to it.
Same. A little warning for your kids out there. Try to be careful with your analogies or whatever when you don't have one planned. I tried to pull one off the top of the head out there. It didn't work out. But anyway, so your book. I want to go right into the book. So it's called Observations at the Speed of Life, and it's short stories about your career. And can you share one from the book and one that maybe didn't quite make the cut?
Sure. I think one of the most popular stories in the book is called An All-Nighter with Larry Bird. I was responsible for McDonald's in Boston, Larry's rookie season. He signed with McDonald's to promote the McChicken sandwich, and I was there for his first television commercial. Now, you might think that sounds glamorous, and about 150 hangers-on showed up at 4 p.m. to start it because we closed the restaurant. But by midnight, most of them were gone. They had arranged a Winnebago for Larry to go between takes. And once everybody left, he just hung around with me and the rest of the extras who were friends, family, and employees. And so I got to see a side of Larry Bird that most people never get to see. He was very down to earth. He wasn't better than anybody. And in the commercial, the punchline of the commercial is he crunched up a paper bag, threw it at the menu board. It bounced off the menu board onto the register. And then there was a 5-year-old kid who opened the trash bin and the bag fell in. And that was the beginning of the Larry Bird, Michael Jordan horse kind of thing. And I was there at the beginning.
Wow.
It only took 12 hours to film. That's why I call it An All-Nighter with Larry Bird.
That's amazing. How good is that mustache up close?
Well, he was just a kid, It was he was taller than everybody there. He was a little bit shy, It was his rookie year, but we sat down and had a McChicken sandwich on the break. I was impressed that he ate one after taking bites of about 20, during the takes. The other interesting thing is McDonald's have been trying to get into the chicken business for decades. And when we made the chicken sandwich, we put this special sauce on it. But every time he took a bite of it, the patty shot out. So we ended up making them dry, completely dry. And he didn't complain. He took the money and he figured he needed to do what was right.
Wow, there you go. I like that. Nobody's heard that Larry Bird story. That's awesome right there. So how about one that didn't quite make it into the book, but still pretty? I mean, you've had so many. I'm sure you had to kind of filter out. What's another good one that didn't quite make it?
Well, this isn't exactly a story about me, but it's about something that had an impact on my life. I read this story about a speech when I was in my early 20s, and the speech was called "The Common Denominator of Success." And the author was wondering if there was anything that successful people had in common. What was the universal thing? And so he studied and he came to the conclusion that the common denominator of success is successful people form the habit of doing things that unsuccessful people don't like to do. And what are the things that unsuccessful people don't like to do? The same things we don't like to do. They don't like to get up early or work hard or whatever. And so from my 20s on, every time I was doing something that I really didn't like to do, I knew I was being successful. I was putting another brick in that success path. Now, the interesting thing is I read that story in the 70s. The speech was delivered in 1940.
Wow.
And it's just as relevant today as it was 80 years ago.
Man, I wonder I wasn't more successful in my 20s. I was doing a lot of stuff I didn't like back then. But you're right. It's just you're laying that foundation. It's going to eventually pay off.
Yeah, right.
That's a
Right.
big theme, like we talked about in your book, is just persistence. You talked about before we came. You're not the most talented guy in the world, but you're just persistent. You kept building those bricks on top of bricks. So that's a great story, especially if you have kids out there. I'm telling you, you need to. They're struggling with persistence. They give up way too early these days. So the earlier you can put that message in them, the better. So
I was always afraid that if I gave up, it would have been like success was just around the corner. You know
yeah,
what I mean? I was paranoid about that. So I just wanted to keep going.
yeah. You never know. If you quit, then you'll never know. But if you keep
Right.
going, I mean, greatness is right around the corner. So
Yep.
that's something people need to hear. So some of your stories get pretty personal in there. Was there one that was particularly difficult to write about?
Yeah, there's one that was the hardest one to write. I wrote it 2 years before I shared it. My son, Joe, was born with spina bifida and multiple birth defects. And the crisis started in the delivery room. He had brain surgery at one day, a spine surgery at one day, and brain surgery at 2 days. And by the time he was 7, he'd been in the operating room more than 3 dozen times. When he was just a baby, we went back. We lived in California. We went back to Boston for a visit. And my dad, who had overcome a lot in his life, was known as the toughest Doherty. And just as we were leaving to go, he turned to me and he said, I want you to know that your son is the toughest Doherty now. So my son is 40 years old. He has a job. He's a big country music fan, and we go to about 100 country music shows a year.
Whoa.
Um, and he's still the toughest Doherty.
Hey man, Joes are tough. You got to watch those Joes. Those are tough guys. Hey Joe, if you're listening right now, man, that's awesome. Keep going, man. That's great. Go get see all those country. That's 100 a year. That's legit right there.
Yep,
I do
yep.
math. That's about 2 a week, right?
Yeah, at least.
Who's his favorite?
Well, he's a country music fan, and he has a special relationship with Dina Carter.
Oh, strawberry
Uh,
wine.
we've yeah, we've seen Dina play all over the country, and sometimes during the concert, she thanks Joe for coming and recognizes him as the man she's had the longest relationship with.
Oh man,
Uh,
claim to fame right there. That's awesome.
uh, yeah.
Yeah, she's great. I remember her back in the day. I'm glad she's still out there touring. That's cool. So let me ask you this: you ran the Boston Marathon at age 70. First of all, what's wrong with you? Second of all, what did you learn through that whole experience?
Well, there's a thin line between bravery and stupidity, and I've crossed back and forth several times.
Yeah.
Um, I learned two things that I really didn't that surprised me. First of all, when I was 60, my wife suggested that I might spend more time walking than on the couch. And I'm very receptive to my wife's suggestion. So I started walking every day. Rain, snow, didn't matter. Sometimes it was only 10 steps, but I kept track. And 400 plus days in a row, I walked. And then one day I said, I wonder what would happen if I ran 100 yards. And so I jogged 100 yards. I was in shock. I didn't, I was, it was good. And then the next day I said, well, I'm going to try to run a mile. And I did. And then I said, well, maybe I should start running instead of walking. And so I started doing that. Eventually, I signed up for a 5K. And of course, because I didn't know what I was doing, I hurt my knee. I went to physical therapy. My physical therapist helped me out, started her own business, and became my running coach. So now I had a mentor who was taking me through. And I said, oh, maybe I'll do a 10K. And I did that for a couple of years. And then one day I went to her and I said, maybe I should do a half marathon. And she says, it's about time you realize that. And I said, okay. So I ran 4 or 5 half marathons. And then one day I went to her and I said, maybe I could do a marathon. And she says, it's about time. So in when I was 70, I registered for the Boston Marathon, and that was a year that the actual race course was closed because of COVID, and you could run a marathon and send your time in. You could create your own course. And so my wife was concerned because, I'm 70 years old. She was concerned about my health. And so I said, well, what if I create an aid station and run in circles somewhere? I run laps. She said, okay. So I had my son, my brother, and a doctor at this aid station at a bar behind Fenway Park where the Red Sox play. And starting at 5 o'clock in the morning, I ran 47 laps around the outside of Fenway Park, which was 26.2 miles. Now, the local television station thought this was interesting, so they showed up. And because I was on the air, people showed up and asked to run with me. And some friends showed up to run the last few miles with me. So it only took me 6 hours and 18 minutes to run a marathon, but I wasn't running for speed. I'll tell you what I did. A marathon is 26.2 miles. When I got to 26 miles, I took my son, who's in a wheelchair. I brought him up the street and then pushed him across the finish line when I finished the marathon. And the people who came to watch it had gone into the bar and gotten a roll of toilet paper and stretched it across the street. So me and my son did finish the marathon and broke that roll of toilet paper.
Man, what a moment. Are you Forrest Gump? Are you like the real life Forrest Gump?
No. But you asked me, the question you asked me was, what did I learn? The first thing I learned is I trained for 500 miles to run that race. And I realized a lot of times we set goals that are easy to achieve. We don't really challenge ourselves. Maybe our boss or a company or a teacher challenges us, but after a while, we look, yeah, I can do that. And we set a goal. Well, this was crazy for me to run a marathon at the age of 70. And it really challenged me. I had to train and, it was all encompassing. So the second thing that happened that totally shocked me is when I finished, the number of people who told me that I inspired them. I didn't set out to inspire anybody, but people were proud of me. And it was like, when was the last time someone said, I'm proud of you? You know what I mean? And it was just this overall glow that probably can never be replicated.
Oh man, that's so cool. And it just, once again, it gets back to your persistence. You didn't start off as this big marathon runner. You just got kicked off the couch by your wife. That's where it all started. Like all great stories start, right?
Yeah, right.
So obviously you've already shown this. Your stories, they mix humor with wisdom. How do you kind of find that fine line between the two, where you add that humor in there, but you're also driving home your points?
Well, I think I do try to be humorous, but what I'm doing is I'm sharing what I learned. Okay. I don't say you do this, you do that. I share what I did, and I write like I talk. That's what people say. I write like I talk. And so the humor in the stories is more like one-liners, like there's a thin line between bravery and stupidity. It's that kind of, like sometimes I'll use a word that I haven't used before, and I'll put in parentheses, I really had been wanting to use this word, which is why I used it. You know what I mean? And so it's that kind of humor. But I think that I experienced something, I thought about it. This is what I learned. I'm sharing it with you. Take it or leave it. It's up to you.
Yeah, I think it's relatable is what it is. I think that's what people want. They don't want an academic book. We had enough of that back in school, right? They want something relatable. Right. That's great. And when I learn a new word, I want people to know too, hey, I'm going to flex this word on you. Right. So you've got a lot of range. You worked as a pipe fitter during the Vietnam War. You had that late night commercial with Larry Bird. You've done all over the place. How do these different experiences kind of contribute to your overall philosophy about life?
Well, I think that there's two ways. I think my core leadership concept that I developed at a young age that I encourage everybody to believe in is nothing takes the place of leadership by example. There's nothing that isn't close. You can go to school, you can read a book, but leading by example is the primary way to lead. One of the stories in the book is called "Don't Try This at Home." And I was a chain restaurant executive. I had a territory of 68 stores in Northern California. I had just assigned to them. And I went around and looked at them, and they really needed some cleanliness improvement. So the first thing I did is I announced, I ranked stores green, yellow, red for how clean they were. And I said, on my next tour, I am going to, the stores that are green, I'm going to give them a plaque on my next tour for excellence. So I did that. And on my third tour, they were so excited to be recognized. I had the newspaper show up. I had family show up, Kids Skip School. But I still wasn't getting what I wanted across the board. So at my staff meeting, I said, there seems to be some confusion over what a clean restaurant is. A clean restaurant is one where I could eat off the floor. And the first one that meets that standard, I will eat off the floor. And so San Jose, there was a restaurant. I announced that they were the best of the best. I showed up to eat off the floor. I had a white tuxedo on. The regional manager brought the high school marching band. They were in the parking lot. I walked in, I sat down on the tile floor in the dining room, and I ordered a waffle. I figured, there were kind of points on the floor, but what I didn't realize, she just threw it right on the floor. What I didn't realize was I had to put maple syrup on it. And so there I am taking the waffle piece and dredging the syrup out of the grout, and I almost passed out. And of course the newspaper is there and it was a front page story. But I will tell you that leadership by example story, I didn't have a problem with clean restaurants the rest of my time there. Everybody got it. It was, if he can do that, then I need to do it too. I need to keep the restaurant clean.
If the boss is eating syrup out of the grout, we got to keep this place clean.
Right.
Man, what a mental image you just put in my head right there. That's amazing. Oh, yeah, I'm definitely keeping it clean. You never know when the boss comes to eat his waffle out of the grout, so you got to be on top of your game. It could be today. So if someone, you had a young professional is just starting out right now, you've got all years and years of leadership training. How would you apply that today's kind of economic world?
Well, I would say I recently read a statistic where 3% of the population sets goals.
Wow.
So if you want to stand out, set a goal. It could be to walk 400 days. It could be to run 100. It just set a goal. You don't have a lot of competition when you're setting goals. I would like to read you my core quote, my core philosophy. And it's a quote from President Calvin Coolidge, who was another Massachusetts boy. And it's called persistence. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, "Press on," has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race.
Man. So we're down here in the South. What we'll say, that'll preach. That'll preach.
So I saw that when I was 22, hanging in a restaurant, and I have a copy with me at all times.
Oh, that's great. So kind of speaking of that, you're back in your younger days, young buck over there at the University of Massachusetts. You're just starting out in the world. You're about to go out there. What advice are you giving yourself?
Well, I wish I had more mentors. I wish I had relied more on mentors. I did a lot of things the hard way. And because I've been a mentor for many years, and people have said, boy, that saved me time, that saved me money, and my success has depended on mentors. When I got a mentor, I skyrocketed. When I didn't have a mentor, I maybe treaded water a little bit. The story in the book that's related to this is I had the Los Angeles area, I had restaurants there. We had a new VP. He rode with me to visit some of my restaurants, and he was pretty quiet the whole time. I could tell that he wasn't crazy about what he was seeing. So on the way back, we stopped to get gas because it was about 100 miles from the office. And I had my credit card here. I had a receipt envelope here. I was very efficient. And as we pulled out, he said to me, you know what you do best in your job? And I said, what? He says, get gas. There's nobody that works for me that gets gas as well as you do. And from that moment on, he was giving me feedback, but what I did with that feedback made a difference. I could be defensive, but I accepted it. I said, tell me more. He worked with me. A few years later, he got a big job with the company, and he promoted me to that San Francisco position. The guy who could get gas was now a legitimate leader because he got a lot of feedback and did something with it.
That's it. That's the last part you nailed. You were coachable. That's what's so important. Be coachable. Right. I mean, you could have been offended. Like, I don't work here to get gas, but hey, you were open. I'm sure your first reaction was, what's this guy talking about? Yeah, but right. You flipped that around, you were coachable, and you got something out of it, and look, it all paid off in the end. Another lesson for you kids out there. So
every time I see a Texaco sign, I think of that trip, and I think of my mentor.
That's awesome. I want to use that on somebody sometime. I'm going to keep my eyes open for a really good gas getter. So that's my goal. But this has been fantastic, by the way. So I know people are saying, hey, I want to get this book now, because the book is just like these stories are right here, right now. It's not an academic thing. It's going to teach you these lessons with humor and stories. So where do people get the book, and where can people follow you and keep up with you?
Sure. So the book is available at Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble. You can find me on LinkedIn because I post a new story every week on LinkedIn. It's called the Wednesday Weblog. My website is ambroselandon.com because I'm a consultant. And if you like what you hear and you may want to talk to me some more, I can be available. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's all. Well, it's a great story. You should stick with it. It's very, very entertaining, and also lessons. That's the best kind right there. They say, facts tell, but stories sell. So those will stick with you. These lessons will stick with you. So I'll link all that in show notes. If you guys are like me, you're not the best spellers in the world, but you can click on a link and I got you. I will help you out with that. So Ed, this was amazing. I had such a good time meeting with you and learning from you. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for listening. And if you're listening right now, please share this episode. Somebody needs to hear these lessons of persistence about how you can get what you want in the world if you'll just stick with it and be coachable. That's kind of some things that are throughout his life, why he's been so successful. And if your wife tells you get off the couch, you get off that couch. So many great lessons out there. So please share this episode, and please tune in next week on the Relentless Positivity Podcast.